And I've been on mute the whole time. Hi, let me start over. Hi, I'm Anna Hoffman, and welcome to this episode of Data Exposed Live. We're super excited to be having you join us today, whether it's live or pre-recorded, and we're going to be sharing some of the latest updates that have happened in January. We also have some very special guests, which I think you're going to enjoy learning about them. So without further ado, we'll get into the content, but I do want to say from wherever you're streaming today, please feel free to add comments or questions at any point during the live stream, and we will answer them, display them as we can. We are seeing them as they come in, so be sure to just let us know what you're thinking if you have comments, questions, or even if you just want to say hi. So we're going to get right into it by starting with some product updates. And I don't have a ton of product updates in this segment yet, but we are going to have some special demos and maybe even some sneak peeks of things that are coming soon. Now, this first update that I wanted to share is about a new data center region being announced in Chile. And I think this is an important one, not because it's directly related to Azure SQL, but because it will be, right? So Azure SQL is one of those fundamental services that comes in a data center, typically when a data center is established. So I think this is something to look out for, especially if you're in this region. Now, the next update I wanted to talk about is about a new website, and this is kind of an interesting product announcement, but this is a new website targeted at .NET application migration. Now, if I just give you a sneak of that, you can see it here. This website is really meant to help you get all of the things you need when you're migrating your .NET applications to Azure App Service and Azure SQL Database, Managed Instance, or VM. So what you're going to see here are things like resources, so get more information about both of these services, some free items to kind of learn more, whether it's like the cost benefit, if you have to justify that, or some example customer stories, and even some resources about how to migrate with the Azure Database Migration Guide, as well as some videos from SQL legends like Bob Ward and members from the app service team. So this is just a cool reference. I thought I'd share it with you all, and maybe you can check it out and let me know if you have any feedback. Now, the next update is a few updates around the Azure Security Center. Now, I wanted to cover these because some of these landed in December, actually, but they posted a more formal update this month. And so what are these updates? Now, a big one of these updates is around Azure Defender for SQL. And this includes things like advanced threat protection and vulnerability assessment. Now, what you see here is that we released Azure Defender for SQL servers on machines as generally available. So what this means is you're going to be able to get this the goal that we're going for is that you can get Azure Defender for SQL anywhere, regardless of where your SQL is running, whether it's on-prem or in our cloud. Now, we also announced the GA or general availability of Azure Defender SQL support for Azure Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pool. So this means you're going to be able to take advantage of those same capabilities and access them all from the Azure Security Center for Azure Synapse Analytics for your dedicated SQL pools. Now, the final thing that they kind of announced is this new experience in the Security Center related to these things for Azure SQL Database and Azure SQL Managed Instance. And I've gotten the chance to play around with some of these updates, and I think they're pretty cool. It's pretty slick, and I think one of the cool things about it is that you're able to see all of your Azure SQL Databases, all of your Azure SQL Managed Instance, as well as other resources from kind of this one, famous word of like single pane of glass in the Azure Security Center. So I think that's a pretty cool update. And the final thing I learned as I was looking into these updates and how to figure out what's new in the Azure Security Center is the tip that I'm including here, and this is called the release notes for Azure Security Center. Now, those of you that have tuned into our show before know that with every news update episode, I also include a blog post. And my blog post is going to share all the references to everything you hear today. We're also going to put it in our description notes if you're watching on YouTube. And so in this blog post, you're going to find this tip and this link to the release notes for Azure Security Center. But basically what they do is they have kind of like a time log that, talks about all of the different updates that have happened. So even if there isn't like a formal blog post about an update, you can stay up to date there. And the link to that blog post that I'm talking about is in the bottom over here. It's aka.ms/news update. So that's where you can go. That blog is live now, and you can go and see all the references and details to everything discussed on the show today. Now, this next segment that we're going to do, and I'm excited that we're going to get to do this on the show, is I'm going to be bringing up Jakob, who is a program manager working on security, to talk about some of the latest security updates. So Jakob, I want to welcome you, and I know we have some exciting news to share about Always Encrypted. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Anna. It's great to be here. So yeah, I'm super excited over a year ago in SQL Server, and now we're bringing it to our past customers in SQL DB. So yeah, that's exciting news, I think.
Awesome. And I think maybe it could have just been me, but I heard you cut out a little bit. But I think the gist of it is that you're releasing something for Azure SQL Database related to Always Encrypted with secure enclaves. Can you just recap that for us in case our viewers also experience that same blip I had?
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, the exciting news is Always Encrypted with Secure Enclaves is now available for preview to our past customers. We had it in SQL Server for over a year, and now SQL DB customers can benefit from it as well.
Awesome, cool. Now, can you remind us, for those of us that might not be so familiar, about Always Encrypted and secure enclaves and kind of like what the benefits of this feature is?
Yeah, absolutely. So Always Encrypted essentially is a technology that allows you to keep control, retain control of your data even after you move your data to Azure and store it in a database, right? So it achieves that by encrypting data on the client side and never revealing it in plain text on the server side. So even DBAs, admins, or even cloud operators cannot see the data in the clear inside the database. And that provides great security, but the downside is that the database system cannot really do much with the data. And the only operation we have supported without enclaves was just one operation, equality comparison, if you use deterministic encryption. And now we are expanding Always Encrypted by leveraging secure enclaves technologies. In Azure, we are using Intel SGX hardware enclaves. So what happens here, the data now is decrypted. We allow data to be decrypted inside a secure environment, which secure enclave is. It performs computation. The enclave now can perform computations on the data in the clear. And it is safe to do because the enclave is a black box to the containing database system process and the operating system on the machine. So even DBAs and admins cannot see the content of the enclave, cannot see the plain text data in it. So this brings two important benefits. Number one is that now we allow rich confidential queries on sensitive information that includes pattern matching, range comparison, sorting, and more. And you can perform in-place cryptographic operations. What this means that to encrypt your, a column in a very large table, you don't have to move this data as you used to the client side and use tool like Always Encrypted Wizard in SSMS. You don't have to do that. Encryption happens inside the enclave in place. No data movement is required. So these are the main two benefits of enclaves.
Wow, cool. Thanks, Jakob. Now, this seems to be like serious, technical investments in order to get to this place. Now, in SQL Server 2019, even yesterday on Data Exposed, our normal series, we had an episode from Modern Project, who's a MVP, and he talked about Always Encrypted in SQL Server 2019. Is this technology, Always Encrypted with secure enclaves in Azure SQL Database, the same as what it is in SQL Server 2019?
Well, yeah, it's essentially the same feature. It's almost identical, but there is a couple of important differences. Number one is that in SQL Server we use software enclave technology called virtualization-based security, and we use host guardian service for attesting enclaves. The attestation is this process of verifying the enclave is trustworthy. And in Azure SQL Database, we use hardware enclaves, as I mentioned, Intel SGX technology, and we use Microsoft Azure attestation for verifying enclaves are trustworthy. So these are technicalities, but in the essence, the one key benefit in Azure SQL DB is that secure enclaves are essentially much easier to set up and configure than in SQL Server, which is what you would expect from a PaaS environment.
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. I'm sure people are going to be excited to hear that they don't have to necessarily worry about all of the things required to setting it up. You know, Jakob, I don't know if you have something you can show us, but I'd love if there was a demo that you might have.
Yeah, absolutely. I can certainly show the demo. So what I have here is basically a simple web application, human resources application, which allows me to filter employee records by salary range, and I can filter them by social security number. So that's my web app. And this application talks to a database, an Azure SQL DB. Here I have SQL Server Management Studio. I'm connected to this database as a DBA. And as a DBA, I can view all this information, including sensitive data, the SSN and salary columns in the clear. There is nothing that's stopping me from extracting the data I want, right? So now, when I use this application, it sends some queries to the database, and here I have configured an extended event session that allows me to intercept queries that this database sends. So let's actually pull these X events, and once this completes, we can inspect one of those queries. So as you can see, it's a simple select statement against employees table, and but what I really want to highlight is that it contains some fairly rich computations in the workloads. It contains pattern matching against social security number column, and it contains range comparisons against salary column, right? So here's what we want for this application. We want to ensure that potentially malicious administrators cannot see sensitive data in the SSN and salary columns in the clear. And we also want to make sure that the application remains unchanged, that it can issue the same queries and Azure SQL Database can process the same queries without any changes. So let's do that by configuring always encrypted with secure enclaves. Now, there are a few steps that you need to do. I will not show all the details of all these steps, but I can walk you through the essential aspects of the configuration. So the first thing that I need to do is to make sure that my database runs on hardware that is equipped with Intel SGX technology, right? So to do that, in the portal, I would go to the configure blade, and I click change configuration, and here I need to select the DC series hardware configuration, which is a new hardware option, which is currently also in preview. And when I do that, when I select DC series, this will place my database on a machine that supports Intel SGX. This is a prerequisite for using always encrypted with secure enclaves in Azure SQL Database. You need to ensure that your database runs on hardware that supports enclaves. The next thing that I need to do, we talked very briefly, about attestation. So attestation is a process of verifying the client can trust the enclave inside the database. And in my
Hey, Jakob, we lost you for a second. You there?
All right. I think you lost me again.
Yeah. Can you start?
Am I back?
Yep, you're back.
All right, so I talked about Azure attestation, which is the next thing that we need to configure. In SQL DB, we're using Microsoft Azure attestation for that. And And we need to ensure that we have the attestation policy set up in that new Azure service. So this policy allows the client application, the driver inside the client application, to verify the enclave inside the database is a genuine SGX enclave, and it runs the genuine SQL always encrypted library. And this verification happens before the client driver sends any queries that perform computations on sensitive data inside the database, right? So after I've set up all that, I can actually finally encrypt my sensitive data columns. And here I'm using a different instance of SSMS to highlight, to emphasize the fact that I'm playing a different role now. I'm not a DBA anymore. I'm a security administrator for this application who is responsible for protecting sensitive information in this application and in the database. So I'm going to encrypt these two columns. Again, before I do that, one more little step. I need to make sure that I'm configured to the database with always encrypted enabled for my connection, and I need to point SSMS to the same attestation policy that I configured in Microsoft Azure Attestation. So let me do that. Let me connect. And now I'm ready.
Jakob, we lost you just for a second, but I think you were just connecting, so it's all good.
Okay, so I connected to the database with always encrypted enable, with attestation configured for my connection. I am ready now to encrypt my columns by running this simple T-SQL script. By the way, this is something you cannot do without enclaves. You cannot encrypt columns using T-SQL. You have to use tools like Always Encrypted Wizard in SSMS. So I have run this query already, and now we can actually check that the columns are encrypted in the database. So here's what the DBA, I'm switching back to the SSMS instance that DBA was using. And this is what the DBA could see before. They could access all the data in the clear. Now, if I rerun this query, DBA cannot see SSN or salary in the clear. All the data is now encrypted. So we have achieved the first goal that we had. Now, let's see if the application still actually works. Let's see if we can filter by salary still. Yes, we can. Can we filter by social security number? Yes, that still works without any changes. So let's see if anything changed as far as the queries this application sends to the database are concerned. So let me pull the latest X events, and let's look at one more X query here. The latest query that the application sent. So as you can see, this is the same query, no changes here, the same pattern matching operation, the same range comparison against salary column. So basically, what I showed you here is that with always encrypted with secure enclaves, Azure SQL Database can process rich confidential queries without exposing sensitive information to potentially malicious DBAs, admins, even cloud operators, so that you can keep control of your data, you can confidently store your data in Azure SQL DB.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jakob. This has been really interesting. I really like that demo. I actually hadn't seen it before. If people want to learn more, I see we put up the blog below. This is a blog. Do you think this is the best place for people to go to get started in learning more?
Yeah, so here we're showing the link to the blog post that we published last week when we launched this feature for public preview, and this blog post contains even more links to very useful information, including documentation, tutorials, and a webinar that is coming up tomorrow.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Jakob. We do have one question from our audience.
Sure.
Our Litchfield says, will this be coming to Azure Postgres as well? And I'm not sure if this is something you can comment on or not, but thought we'd ask.
Yeah, certainly I can. So this feature has been, as you might know, a big differentiator for Azure SQL product family, and I'm not aware of any plans to change that. In the foreseeable future, we're gonna keep it that way. This feature is going to remain basically a differentiator for Azure SQL.
Awesome. Thanks so much. One more reason to pick Azure SQL. Well, Jakob, thanks so much for joining us today. Folks, please check out that blog post, and we're going to move on to our next segment.
Thank you.
All right. So next, what we have is our blog and video updates, and we're going to keep chugging along. We still have more guests, so be sure to stay with us, and let's get into some blogs and videos. Now, the first thing we are going to do, and again, I'm a little bit biased since I host Data Exposed, is we're going to talk about some of the episodes that have been released this month or are being released this month. So you can see there's an awesome set of videos being released. Moth, for example, we mentioned this earlier, did a deep dive on Always Encrypted in SQL Server 2019. That's definitely one worth checking out. Silvano has come on the show often for us to talk about many different things, and this month he came on to talk about connectivity as well as simplifying authentication with managed identity. So these are two really useful videos. I personally learned a lot. We also had Kate Smith round out her 6-video series where she told us all about Elastic Jobs for Azure SQL Database, including using PowerShell or using T-SQL. So you can actually go through now and kind of pick your route if you want to see the T-SQL videos or the PowerShell videos or both to see how that's possible. And then I wasn't sure if I should share this with you, but I might as well. Buck Woody is coming on to an episode that's being released tomorrow, so you have to stay tuned and follow us on Data Exposed to learn more about this. But tomorrow he'll be coming on to talk about SQL workshops, and this is a fun video. Buck is also the co-host of Something Old, Something New, which we have on this show every third Wednesday, I believe, of the month, so that will be a good one to check out. All right, on to other blogs. Now, on the Azure blog, there wasn't a ton this month related to Azure SQL, but there was one very interesting blog, at least I thought it was interesting, from JG, who's one of the CVPs here at Microsoft. And he posted this article talking about DB Engines. Now, DB Engines is a company, like a third-party company, that basically polls various sources to identify popularity of different databases. Now, what's really awesome is that Azure SQL Database score over the past year increased 253%. So that's from people like you all watching, tweeting and talking about Azure SQL, using Azure SQL in your job. So that's really awesome. And, you know, we kind of want to thank you for helping us get here, because it didn't happen just because of us. And one of the cool things about this is the first time ever that a cloud database service has placed in the top 3 database systems. So pretty exciting year for Azure SQL Database, and we're only hoping to continue on that trend as we go forward. So that was a cool blog. I'll share again in my news update blog if you want to read the full details on DB Engines and how they even come up with these rankings. Now, as always, we are going to share the other blogs. The SQL Server Techcommunity blog is full of updates. You can see there were a lot of security updates. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you might be interested in checking those out and learning more about any one of them, depending on what version of SQL Server you're running. Also, there were some new management packs for SSRS and SSAS you might be interested in checking out. And the really interesting one to me, or just kind of a newer one, is around deploying SQL Server on AKS with Helm charts on a Windows machine. So if you know a lot about AKS and Windows and SQL Server, this is a really exciting thing. And this is a really interesting blog that's going to take you through how to do that. So that's the SQL Server Techcommunity. Again, all the links for these will be on my blog. And next, I wanted to talk about what's new in the Azure SQL Techcommunity blog. Lots of interesting blogs here. You can see Jakob's blog there about Always Encrypted with Secure Enclaves was part of this month. There were also a few security blogs by Andreas Walter, who is a member of our security team on Azure SQL, and he talks about kind of the intro to security principles, which I found really interesting as someone who's not a security expert, but always looking to learn more. He also talked about the principle of least privilege, which is another interesting read. And Sasha came on and he released a blog about getting insights into your utilization of SQL Server licenses. Now, while this might seem like, not necessarily the most exciting topic, it is exciting because it's really about saving money. So he basically released this script that allows you to basically scan all your resource and understand your utilization of your SQL Server licenses and let you know if you can take advantage of things like Azure Hybrid Benefit to leverage your existing licenses. So this is a great one. It's also an article by Kate Smith, the woman who did the series on Elastic Jobs. She did this interesting introduction / semi deep dive. I found it pretty deep myself about query processing. So if you're new to intelligent query processing, Kate basically goes through some of the benefits here and some of the details on how this actually works and how it affects your database performance. So also an interesting one. Now, the last one that I wanted to talk about today, and I actually have a brief demo, which I think I'm going to have time to do, is about Azure SQL DB tips. So a member of our team, Dimitri Furman, he's been working really hard along with other members of the team on this thing called Azure SQL DB tips. So I'm going to share the blog, but first let me just go ahead and share my screen and you all can take a look at what this is. So if I go over here, and again, you're going to get this blog later, but here's the blog that Dimitri released that talks about this. And he basically created this GitHub repository, which has a script that's going to test a bunch of Azure SQL Server best practices. So I pulled this script down, and you can see it here. It's a long script. So he's basically using the metadata in your Azure SQL database to kind of scan for any best practices or things that he thinks you might want to consider. So for example, if I go ahead and run this, and now one of the interesting things on his wiki, which I'll also share a link to, is that he actually shares like how you might want to use this. So maybe you use it when you're troubleshooting something. Maybe you use it at different times during workloads to kind of see if, when there's a high workload, are there some optimizations that this might recommend or other things like this. So just in this one, you can see a few options here. So for example, this tip ID, notable network connectivity events found. So you can see in the details here, or you can copy this URL and go back to the tips, and you can see it will take you exactly to where these tips are explained. So you can learn more about why this happened and how you might be able to mitigate it. And you can see they even have blog articles, documentation. This is a really useful thing. It's also a pretty new thing. So I think, if you have feedback, feel free to file a bug in this GitHub repo since it's open. And I'm really excited to get more into it and learn more about how it works. So that's the Azure SQL Database tips. Again, this will be in my blog. And now we're going to move forward to our other blog sites. So these are the two remaining blog sites. And I think if you joined me for the last episode, I commented on how it's very interesting that we do have a lot of updates that come through a lot of different places. So hopefully this episode just serves as another way to help you kind of sort through all of those things and kind of figure out at least what I think is important when it comes to Azure SQL. Now, in Azure SQL Devs Corner, now this is our blog that is really focused on developers and developer topics. So fittingly, we have two blogs this month, one by Davide, and he did a really interesting blog on modern development. So I think I have that one up here. So I'm not going to go through this, but he basically takes you through creating a REST API using CI/CD and then going back. And one of the interesting things here is he does it with everything. So if you're like up to speed on CI/CD and Azure DevOps and all that stuff, you can use that one. But if you want to learn just about how it relates to SQL, you also have that option. So he has two different samples that are available. The other one that I found really interesting and actually a lot of fun was by Arvind. He does a lot of interesting work on some of our modern developer capabilities, one of those being Graph. So this was really interesting. I personally haven't done a ton with Graph, but I love a good like riddle or problem. So basically he took this problem, and just to share it at the highest level, what this is is it's the crossing the river problem. So you have 3 lions and 3 wildebeest. They all need to cross the river. Only 2 can go across the river at one time. And if the lions outweigh the wildebeest at any given point on either side, then they'll eat the wildebeest. So it's basically a challenge of like, how can you get them all across without any of them getting eaten, any of the wildebeest getting eaten? So it's a fun problem. And what Arvind basically did is he created this problem using graph. Basically, you want to identify all the options that are available and then figure out which ones are possible or not. So he released this script and it's all in the blog post, but basically he takes you through, and I found it really interesting if you're interested in either learning how graph works in SQL DB or just learning more about this problem and an interesting way to solve it. I found this super interesting. I spent way too long analyzing it the other day just because I thought it was really fun. But basically he goes through creating all this. You can see you even create some graph tables, and it was really easy. You can kind of run this on any Azure SQL database that you have. And so for me, I actually took a notebook. I have it here. And I was like, I'm going to figure this out without Arvind's sample. And as you can see, it actually took me a while, and I kind of struggled with it. But ultimately, I got to the answer. And I know this is kind of hard to see, and I don't know how to do this. But basically, it took me 11 steps to get everyone across safely. And so what you can do with Arvind's sample, let me switch back so you can see it, is with Arvind's sample, after you set it all up, you basically get that solution here. So the total number of trips was 11, and he even says what each of those trips are. And there's more details on how this works, but I thought it was really interesting. And then on top of that, if you want to get even more into graph visualizations, he included an open source tool called GraphViz. And what you can do is you can run his query, again, spend more time looking at it, obviously, and you can go into GraphViz online, you can add it here, and in a matter of moments, you'll actually have this whole graph system of what the scenario is and the different options and how you can actually make it work. So I just thought that was a really fun, cool example and a cool way to also learn more about Azure SQL Database and some of these modern capabilities like Graph that you actually have in a relational database like SQL. So that's one I definitely recommend checking out. Then the Azure Database Support blog, they post a lot of interesting things. If any of these topics are relevant to you, I definitely recommend checking them out. They're always putting up different lessons learned. So it can be a great if you have something related or if you just want to learn more about a given topic. Like for example here, having a linked server connecting to a read scale replica. So that's an interesting use case, and maybe you just want to learn more about it and any of the challenges and any of the solutions related to it. So that's what I have for blogs. Now, every once in a while, there is a new Azure Data Studio blog that accompanies a certain release. And I thought it would be really interesting if we could do a segment where we brought Alan on and to talk about some of these things. So, hey, Alan, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Anna. Hi, Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, wherever you all are. My name is Alan Yu. I'm a PM working on Azure Data Studio and just across our SQL tools portfolio for managing things like SQL Server, Azure SQL, and all these type of things. So yeah, why don't we just get started here? And thanks for having me here, Anna.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. And, I think you have it up. But yeah, we'd love, I think, for some of our viewers that might not be as familiar with Azure Data Studio, I think it's awesome you're going to start here.
Yeah, for sure. So I know this is something that's really gaining popularity over the last few months and years type of thing. But I think it's always good to just, give a reintroduction to what Azure Data Studio is. So Azure Data Studio is our cross-platform open source tool in order to manage relational databases like SQL Server, Azure SQL, and I may have saw this question in the chat, as well as Postgres and Azure Postgres, and hopefully other relational databases along the road. And so, you get your things like being able to make your basic connections into databases, be able to view all your connections, and then execute queries and see the results, and then do things with the results after you execute these queries inside of Azure Data Studio. And what's really great about Azure Data Studio is that you kind of have this great lightweight experience to really focus on optimizing for executing these queries and making connections. But you can also leverage the extension marketplace for those of you who are familiar with VS Code to kind of choose the extensions that you actually need to get your day job done. So we provide a lot of flexibility and are always publishing new releases, kind of similar to what Anna mentioned. We basically have a monthly release cadence and accompany it with release blogs and tweets to just kind of showcase all the new features that come out that directly come from all of your feedback. And I think that's one of the great things about having a modern tool, especially something featured and hosted on GitHub, in that we get to have this deep customer engagement with all of you. So this is kind of what that looks like. You go to github.com/Microsoft/Azure Data Studio, and you get this really transparent view of all the code is out there. And then if you go to the issues tab, as kind of shown here, you can see all the issues reported by customers, whether it's a bug or whether it's a new feature. And then we could assign engineers, or we could assign what month we plan to either fix that bug or bring in that new release. What you can see here is actually the top most requested features. By clicking the sort button, you can sort them by the number of reactions. And by far, you can see that people want to see more and more databases added into Azure Data Studio, so that you have one tool that you can easily manage these different types of databases. So
awesome. That's really cool, Alan. And we were talking about this before, and I was like, well, I'm not really sure what you're going to show us, but I'd love to show some cool things, maybe some new things, maybe some kind of hidden gems things. So I'm kind of looking forward to what's next.
Absolutely. So what I have for you here, instead of like switching back and forth between the actual tool, is I'll go highlight a couple of the new features that came out in the November release, or just more recently, in case you might have missed some of the recent announcements, or you haven't updated Azure Data Studio in a little bit. And a lot of these features really kind of came from the whole community, and just hearing about things that you wanted to see in the product. So one thing that's really been something that we've been investing in Azure Data Studio is that we wanted to make it really easy for you to deploy any data service or database service that you want from the tool itself. So whether you need to have like a SQL Server 2019 Developer Edition, or you just need to have something on a SQL Server container, or if you want to try to leverage some of these newer areas, like we actually recently added the Azure SQL Database and SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machine, as well as we have some areas for newer investments for like things like Azure Arc and SQL Server Big Data Clusters. So we just give you this nice way to easily deploy any of these, so that you can, in case you don't have one ready, you can do it within Azure Data Studio. And I guess another big investment, and something that has kind of taken the SQL community by storm, is this concept of notebooks. And the idea of notebooks is that you can have these human readable text cells, which allows you to drop images and GIFs, and kind of takes you more than just having the basic comments that you might have in your scripts. And then also accompany it with executable code cells. So you have this nice document that you can interact with and share with other colleagues, and also share the results of these queries. And so far, it's been really great in terms of onboarding teams, in terms of troubleshooting, or building these kind of rich pipelines using notebooks. And one feature that really kind of came out from a bunch of feedback that we got from user research studies was that people who started off with these .SQL files thought, it must be really easy to just convert this into a notebook, so that I could start using notebooks right away, because I hear it's the new hotness. And so we added a button. By just clicking a button, you can go ahead and convert your SQL files into a notebook. And you can also sometimes there might be a use case for this too, you could convert it back into a .SQL file. So this was definitely a great feature that was requested by the community, and we kind of noticed from user research feedback. So we're super excited to have this feature implemented already inside of Azure Data Studio. In addition to that, one of the visions around notebooks is being able to have this rich operationalized pipelines. And automation seems to be a really big thing within the SQL community. And so kind of the first steps to get there is that you need to have the ability through CLIs or through other methods to be able to pass parameters into these different notebooks or inject different parameters so that, one notebook can pass other parameters to another, or just, run a basic command with it. So in order to kind of get there, one of the first steps was to get parameterization. So, right now it mostly just works inside of Papermill, which is currently the same kind of framework that Netflix leverages for their rich pipelines that you may have heard of about using notebooks for a lot of their internal systems. And now we have parameterization. And you can kind of see it in this GIF here, that in the command line in the terminal, we're passing in x equals 10, and that does change the value of the notebook once you execute it once again. And we'll see in an output .ipynb file here that the results do change. And so, we're adding new features here. There's some new features that are actually coming up in the February release. So keep an eye out for that February release blog of how we're going to continue to evolve this feature. And not only do we make it work inside of Azure Data Studio and make it work for other languages, but possibly also contribute this back into the open source community. So, it's a new Microsoft out there where we are embracing open source components, leveraging inside of our products, and hopefully making it easier for all of our customers while also giving back to the open source community.
Awesome. This is cool stuff. I hadn't seen the parameterization stuff yet.
Yeah. So super excited to get to go over that feature. And this is actually a sneak peek into something. So a couple of those features were notebook features that already exist in the product. This one's coming up. So all of you for the first time get to see this feature. So we have this concept where you don't just want to work with single notebooks, but you want to have like multiple notebooks and kind of package them together. And this concept is known as Jupyter Books, not Jupyter Notebooks, but Jupyter Books. Sorry, I didn't come up with the name. But Jupyter Books allows you to have this, almost like a chapters in a book or sections to kind of organize these notebooks and send them out. And one thing that we've heard a lot is that it's a little bit clunky in order to edit these books. So we added this new functionality so that you could easily move books within the contents of a Jupyter book without having to play with the YAML file all the time. So we give you this GUI assisted experience to be able to move the book just like you're kind of used to from other GUI tools, while also automatically updating the YAML file so that it's all kind of automated for you and abstracted out for you. So
that's really cool. Yeah, because YAML, I mean, I don't know about you, but I typically tend to struggle getting those in the right format.
Yeah, I run into it all the time too. And yeah, so I think just all these little things just to make it a little bit easier for all of you, again, kind of comes from your feedback. So please go on our GitHub. Let us know, try these features out and let us know how we can improve them. And it is something we will get into our planning and get to fix so that you can start using it more and more. So kind of taking a step back from notebooks, and as much as I said the new hotness was around notebooks, this one's even more recent and catching the SQL community again by storm too. And this is the idea of SQL database projects. And this has kind of been a journey because we brought in things like the data tier application wizard, we brought in schema compare into Azure Data Studio, and almost everyone that we talked to said, this is what we're looking for. Please bring this into Azure Data Studio. And so with the September release, we were finally able to bring SQL database projects in, while also making sure that, bring your own SQL database project from SSDT and bring it into this cross-platform world thanks to .NET Core. And now you have this experience inside of Azure Data Studio. And this is something that we are continuing to add new features to. I think for those of you who have been playing around with it, we added a new viewlet in the bar so you can have this place to manage all your projects, while also having the idea of workspaces where you can manage a single or multiple database projects within the same workspace. So, we're kind of looking at how many people are installing this extension, and it just keeps growing and growing. So, if you are someone who have been using SSDT for a long time and have been thinking about, I want to use that on a Mac, or I just want to use it in kind of this modern experience along with source control and all that, please consider downloading the SQL Database Projects extension.
Awesome.
Okay. Yeah, so those were just a few overviews of some of the new features. There's definitely more along the way, and we're still in this great semester planning to bring in new features to all of you. I do want to take a moment to talk about fundamentals really briefly. I don't want to take up too much time, but I do want to say that fundamentals is very important for us in this product as we continue to mature it. So in the December release, you may have not seen too many new features, but we did fix 30 bugs. So we're following this new model where each semester we're going to dedicate at least 2 months to focus on addressing the bugs that you all report and seeing if we could just kind of cut down on our our bug count that we have inside of GitHub. So, we want to focus on customer-driven priorities, focus on quality of life improvements, things like performance, acquisition, security, and more. So just want to make it really clear that fundamentals is important to us. And yeah, now I guess the final thing is call to action. Please go try out the latest release. You can try it out ak.ms get Azure Data Studio. You could report an issue or request a feature for us to implement in the product through this ak.ms link. And then finally, you can follow us on Twitter at Azure Data Studio. It's a very active Twitter community out there. And I actually have it. That's my default Twitter profile on my phone. So if you want to wake me up at the start of the day, just tweet at Azure Data Studio, and we can address any concerns that you have or questions about the product.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Alan. This has been cool. I mean, you really packed a lot in there. It's very interesting. One person commented, so many bug fixes, nice. And someone also said, I need to look at this in more detail. It's very interesting. So I think you wowed the audience. Thanks so much. We're going to try to get you on the news update next month, so people should stay tuned for more.
Sounds good. Bye, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks. Now, next, what we're going to do is we are going to bring up Marisa to talk about events. Marisa, thanks for coming back on the show. What do you have for us this month?
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, so quickly, I'll go through kind of what we have going on 220, which I think you spoke at Multi-Cloud last month, but Bob Ward is actually speaking this month about SQL Edge to Cloud. And then on 227, we have Julie speaking about Notebooks 101 for SQL people. Again, we'll have registration links in the blog that Anna wrote up, so you can join there. Also, we have a webinar that we're involved in called Gain Economic Value Migrating to Azure SQL. So you can register to attend that on 2/11. And for Data Exposed Live, this show, we actually have a really exciting event coming up on 2/3, so next Wednesday, called Azure or Around the Clock with Azure SQL and Azure Data Factory. So for that event, our engineering teams are partnering for an all-day event where the community can come together to learn about Azure SQL and Azure Data Factory. They can connect right with the experts, and there's even a hackathon. We have this event in 2 time zones, in America and Asia. So this is the first kind of data exposed special, if you will. So we're super excited. Anna and I have both been closely planning this event. So we're really looking forward to it next week. The first hour is actually our Data Exposed Live kickoff. And then you can stay with us. You can join the ATE after. There's sessions. And that registration link, which will also be in Anna's blog, is aka.ms/aroundtheclock. Also coming up on Data Exposed Live on 210, we're doing a deep dive best practices assessment for Azure SQL VMs, managed instances, and SQL servers. We're doing another deep dive on 217 around Azure SQL Security, and this is a new series that will be starting for us. But this episode is the what, why, and how of securing your data with Azure SQL. And then the end of the month on 224, there is a something old, something new with Buck Woody, which if you attended last month, it was hilarious. Anna and Buck have a great rapport, and it's real fun to watch. If you missed any of these episodes, you can catch them on our YouTube as well. And that's it for this month. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Marisa. Happy to have you on, and we're really excited for the event that starts next week. So definitely excited.
Great. Thanks.
Awesome. All right, so moving along. Now, next what we have is we have a very interesting segment, but first I want to talk to you about the module of the month. So as you know, every month I'm going to be sharing a module on Microsoft Learn. And the last month we did Introduction to Azure SQL. And this month we're doing deploying and configuring servers, instances, and databases for Azure SQL. So this is the second module in the Azure SQL Fundamentals Learning Path on Microsoft Learn. And you can catch it at that link over there. Now, related to Microsoft Learn is certifications. And for this next segment, I'm really excited because we're bringing on an old friend of mine, Chris Testa O'Neill. Chris, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, morning, Anna. Thanks for having me on. Hope you're well.
Yeah, of course. Happy to have you on. Really appreciate you coming on. Now, today we're going to be talking about certifications. And I understand that there's some new stuff that's happening in the space of data and AI certifications. Can you tell us a little bit more about those changes and also maybe some context on why those changes are happening?
Sure, absolutely. So last week we announced updates to 2 of our existing certifications in a Microsoft Learn blog. Let's start off with the Azure AI Engineering Associate certification to begin with. Essentially, there's a new exam. It's AI 102, designing and implementing a Microsoft AI solution. This is going to replace the current exam, AI 100. Now, the main change of that exam is that the feedback we've been getting, and I'll go into more details about that in a moment. The main feedback is there was a desire to have more focus on the software engineering aspect of AI solutions rather than the solution part. So, whereas AI 100 was really focused more on the solution architecture and wiring up all the various pieces of the AI ecosystem, this exam is going to be more focused on working with the APIs and the SDKs. It's still going to be focused on cognitive services and cognitive search in the Microsoft Bot framework, but you're going to see more of a focus on how you implement that in software solutions rather than wiring it up. The second update is exam DP203. Now, that is data engineering on Microsoft Azure. And the first point to mention here is that this single exam is going to be replacing both exams of DP200, which is implementing a data solution in Azure, and DP201, which is designing. Now, the key move for this is in the fact that, as we all know, Azure Synapse Analytics was released in December with a whole plethora of features that can basically enable you to have a one-stop shop for all your analytical needs. And fundamentally, we had to respond to that because there's so many different areas in there that it had a major impact on what we call a job task analysis. That was fundamentally what prompted these changes. Essentially, every 2 months, we go through the product changes, we look at the feedback from the exams. We also take in various feedback from product groups such as yourself to go, is the exam relevant? Does it truly measure the skills that are required? And fundamentally, over the period with the AI 100 and the DP200 and 201, we get feedback that says, well, maybe we need to change it so much. So every 2 months, we look at that feedback and we will adjust the pool of questions to reflect changes in the job skills or indeed the feedback that we get. Now, one of the things that can cause a big change is the introduction of a new technology, which is why we have basically done a revamp of the Azure Data Engineering certification. Essentially, we did what is known as a job task analysis refresh on both them, just to validate that the skills and the knowledge that you need to be successful in these roles, if they were still valid today. And it prompted the addition of more software engineering-based content within the AI engineering certification. And it prompted, there was not just a focus on Azure Synapse Analytics, but also a focus on, well, we want more questions around data processing, transformation, cleansing, all that good stuff that you would do when you're delivering analytical solutions. So hopefully that gives you a bit of the context of why we've made the announcement last week.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate it. So thank you, Chris. And also, I think it's really cool that, in a sense, like you all are very agile, right? So you hear something has changed or hear something is different and you're working quickly to get that updated on a regular basis. So that's really cool. Now, if I was preparing for one of these exams currently, like what should I or any viewers do?
So that's a great question. And it's the most common question in my inbox today and also in LinkedIn as well. First of all, don't panic, right? You have time. So it's important to mention that the existing exams in market today are still going to be there until June the 30th of this year. So if you've gone down the path of studying for AI 100, DP200, DP201, there is time. However, if you're only just starting out on your journey, it's probably worth you considering going for the new released exams. AI 100 and DP 203 will be released in beta on February the 23rd. So if you're really just starting out on your certification journey and your path is basically, I don't know, less than 50%, you'll probably want to go and do the new exams. And the good news is, you know, any studying that you've done today is still relevant. So please don't think that you've wasted your time. You haven't at all. Now, the interesting one is with DP, with the data engineering certification, because there's 2 exams, right? So if you've taken one of the exams already, that means you've done a lot of the studying for it already. I would just go ahead and take the other exam, quite frankly. But if you haven't taken the exam or you haven't got anything booked, again, there are learning paths that are live today on Microsoft Learn that can help you fill in the gaps, that can help you take the DP203 exam when it's released in February. So in short, it depends where you are in your journey, but hopefully we've provided enough of a buffer for people to either complete the existing exams or decide to take the new exams.
Awesome, cool. Yeah, it makes sense that, you know, I can start reviewing stuff that's going to be in the new exams today using resources on Microsoft Learn. So it's cool. You kind of have a little bit of flexibility to figure out which way you want to go. You know, the last question I have, it seems like there's a lot going on in this space. You know, I just mentioned that, you know, you guys release stuff pretty frequently, you update stuff frequently. Like, what's the best way for viewers to stay up to date on what's going on with whether it's training related to Azure or certifications or Microsoft Learn? Like, how should people stay up to date?
Yeah, for any updates on the certifications, Anna, I would highly recommend you go to the Microsoft Learn blog. That will be available in a link after this show. Oh, brilliant, it's up on there. So MS Learn blog, aka.ms. Everything is up there for all our certifications. So it's not just limited to the AI and the data engineering that I've just talked about. If you're doing data science, so you're an Azure Database Administrator, I know that's a certification close to your team's heart, you can get the latest information from there.
Awesome, great. Well, thanks, Chris, so much for coming on the show. This has been really useful for me, and I'm sure for our viewers as well.
Thank you for having me on the show. Have a great day.
You too, thanks. Awesome. Okay, so we've had a great episode so far. I'm really excited about all the guests we had on the show today. Now, as we wrap up, we just have a few more things. The next thing is my pick of the month. So as you may or may not know, every month I'm going to go and do a pick of the month. Last month I picked some books, so some books by Bob Ward, as well as a book written by myself and several other members of the Azure SQL Database team. And this month, you know, I know this is supposed to be February and it's January, so I thought, you know, why not just go with it? And I'm going to pick something that's actually happening in January. So this is my pick of the month. This is happening on Friday and Saturday of this week. And this is a cool event because what it's going to do is they're actually taking donations for children affected by COVID-19. So this is like really a cool event to me because you can help out in places that really need our help. And you can also learn some great content. And some exciting news to share, which I don't know if it's been shared publicly, is that the leader of this product group, so the leader of the Azure SQL and SQL Server and SQL on Azure Arc product group, Asad Khan, he actually is doing the keynote for this event. So that's something I wanted to share. I think this is going to be a really cool event. I think we have over 10 Microsoft speakers and a ton of Microsoft Most Valuable Professionals, or MVPs, coming on to this virtual conference. It's called the SQL Server Virtual Conference, and it's run by C# Corner. They're a really awesome organization. I've worked a lot with them, and Stephen Simon is putting on an awesome event. So that's what we have for today. I do have a comment on Twitch. Someone says, this is the first time catching you on Twitch. What is your schedule going forward? This has been incredibly informative. Awesome, thank you, R. Litchfield. So we are streaming every Wednesday, wherever you stream from today, you can catch us every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific. We'll be coming on for an hour. We do various topics. Marisa talked about some of those topics coming up in the next month. And yeah, we'd love to, have you catch us every Wednesday. So thanks for that question. Thanks for that comment. And let's see, I think that's all we have. Oh, the most important link, well, maybe one of the most important links, if you want all of the links and resources from today, is this aka.ms/news update. So this is where you can go, again, sounding like a broken record, but this is where you can go to find a blog post containing all of these news updates we talked about today with links to everything we talked about. So you don't have to take screenshots throughout these episodes, whether it's resources from Alan, resources from Chris, resources from Jakob, or resources from me, you can find them all there. And finally, that's all we have today. That's kind of our show. Thank you so much for tuning in from wherever you are on this live episode or pre-recorded or post-recorded episode. And if you have any questions, comments, feedback, please add them to wherever you're streaming from. Even if it's later, please add a comment. Please like our video, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We do release videos every week in addition to these live episodes. And we hope to see you next time on Data Exposed.